Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 563 for the 4th of August. We're into August 2019. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Coming up on this week's show, I catch up with a very old friend of mine. Well, he's not old. I mean, he's an old friend. We've been friends for a long time. Derek Colanduno, one of the original skeptical podcasts. Skepticality, the show he did with Swoopy, Robin McCarthy, predates my show, predates the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, predates Skeptoid, predates the Geologic podcast, also Skeptics with a K, the ESP, the European Skeptics podcast. Derek and Swoopy got in before all of us. And of course, not too many years after Derek started his skeptical podcasting, he suffered a brain aneurysm, which really nearly cost him his life. It's remarkable what Derek had to do to get back his life back together, especially when it came to podcasting. But Derek is also the program director at Skeptrack at Dragoncon, which is coming up in a few weeks. And Derek will give us an overview of what to expect at Dragoncon this year. And I'm certainly looking forward to being part of that fun. After that, we hear about this year's nominations for the Australian Skeptics Bent Spoon Award. Oh, I like the Bent Spoon Award. Presented to the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle every year from Australian Skeptics. We're going to look at some of the past winners. Do they really win? They're losers. They sort of win. They win an award you don't want to win. And again, find out how you, yes, you, can help us find a worthy recipient for this year. Following that, we dive deep into the back issues of The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian Skeptics. So deep, we can't dive any deeper. We go to issue 1, page 1, story 1. The very first report in the pages of The Skeptic revolving around a Melbourne psychic surgeon. Then to round off the show, a blast from the past again, we go back to 2012 and replay, as a very rare event on the Skeptic Zone we do this, we're going to replay a think tank featuring James Randi. Now, the think tank was for many years a feature of the Skeptic Zone, where we'd get together at the club at the end of the street with some people and a couple of beers and wines and dinner and chat about skeptical issues. Well, in 2012, James Randi joined us when we did a think tank down in Melbourne when we were all there for the Australian Skeptics National Convention. And it's interesting for me to go back, pore over the archives of the Skeptic Zone, because there are many interviews and reports and items that I wouldn't say I've forgotten about, but I certainly don't remember the details. And listening to this think tank with James Randi all over again is a real pleasure. It's great to hear Randy's voice on the show again. And of course, it also features that well-known goose, Maynard. And it just whets our appetite for the upcoming Skepticon in Melbourne in December. Stay tuned at the end of the show for more announcements from me. But now it's time for me to run downstairs. And I think I'll have a slice or two of this lovely chili cheese on toast. Melted, of course. Cheese toast. Melted chili cheese. Special chili. Oh yes, very special chili. And while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Joining me now on the line, all the way from wonderful Atlanta, Georgia, is one of the pioneers, folks, of skeptical podcasting. It's my old friend Derek Colanduno. Hello, Derek.
Should I get my horses all hitched up and get like one of those wagons and head west? Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's what you should do. Being a pioneer. Let's talk about that briefly, Derek. the Skeptic Zone has been around for coming up to 11 years. Skeptoid is even a bit older than that. The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is a bit older than that. Even George Harab has got a show going back over a decade. But I think you beat us all. Can you tell us about the early days of Skepticality and why you started such a thing?
Oh, well, let's see. So, for history there, the Skeptic's Guide is only about a week and a half newer than Skepticality. So, I like to just say we're pretty much started at the same time, about a week apart. So
right.
We didn't know each other. It just happened to be random chance that I didn't know about them. They didn't know about me until we were like 3 or 4 episodes in, actually. Back in the day, I used to be a on-air radio guy in Vegas when I was going to college there. I did a couple morning show. I did a morning show. You can't do 2 morning shows. I had a morning show. I was one of the hosts for a morning show in Vegas, and then also late nights I did alt rock radio, KEDG, owned by George Tobin. George Tobin. He's still around. He still does what he does. He's made famous because he used to do kind of like the Colonel thing from Elvis, but he did it for rock hacks to like make them popular because nobody knew them. Like Tiffany, he put Tiffany in malls without a permit, just made her sing, and then she became a thing. So that was George Tobin. He was one of my and he owned one of the radio station I did the late night alt rock stuff for.
So you were on air, so to speak. So you knew how that sort of side of things worked.
And Swoopy has been a friend of mine since 93, 94. She used to live with me way back when I lived in Vegas. So she would come to the radio station when I did my late night stuff on alt rock, because everybody liked to do that because we had big name people, like we had like Marilyn Manson come in and all those big rock 90s bands would come in to do interviews. So we'd always be there with a microphone and a large citywide audience and go, wouldn't it be nice if we could talk about the stuff we like to talk about, which is like Skepticality. So when podcasting came out, I found that Adam Curry was starting to do it because Tax Tobin said, have you seen this? Because he thought it was funny. And I said, oh, that's cool. And I showed it to Swoopy. I got home one time and on the whiteboard in my office, it said Skepticality. And
wow. I
said, what's that? And Swoopy said, that's the name of our podcast. And that's how we started. But that was, 2003, 4, 5, 4 and 5, 2004. Mm-hmm. So that's how that started. And then just kept up. And then one time when podcasting came to iTunes, because it came much later than podcasting, and before the keynote, at the time, Steve Jobs would release features and then would do a keynote about the features that have been around for a few months. So when they announced the podcasting for iTunes, our show, Skepticality, happened to be number 1 overall in podcasting. So he was doing his keynote, and they put a picture of me and Swoopy, which used to be the logo for our show, behind him.
Of course, yes.
And talked about Skepticality, which is really, really cool. And then 2 days later, that's when my aneurysm blew up in my brain. So yeah, people always made the joke that, your aneurysm happened because your brain just exploded because Steve Jobs talked about you.
and that was quite a dramatic time, folks, because I began listening to Skepticality quite early on, and then one day there was a strange message come just from Swoopy, and Swoopy told the whole world that you had a terrible aneurysm, stroke, or whatever it was.
They didn't know yet.
And at the time, interestingly enough, I and Stefan Soika, who is the part-time co-host of the Skeptic Zone, we were doing another show way back then called the Skeptic Tank, I think it was called, which was, one of the very first ones I ever did, podcasting-wise. One of the early predecessors of the Skeptic Zone. And that happened during our making of that show, so I told my audience that this message had come through. Interesting times, but after quite a long period of getting your head together, if I can put it that way, you were back.
Yeah, well, I'd had to relearn how to... They told me I would never walk again. I kind of walk. I walk, but if I don't think about it, I fall. But I can walk, so I don't care. My speech took a long time. Like 3 years of speech therapy before I could even remotely sound like I sound now. Before then, I sounded like a stroke patient. In fact, there was some recordings on the Skepticality episodes between like 2006 and 2007 where Swoopy was running the show, and she would have me on now and then. And I go back and listen to that. I was like, oh, man, I really couldn't talk then. But yeah, so I through lots of really good speech therapy. They remapped all of my speech through where you sing. My speech therapist said it's like this. The part of your brain where people talk, you can look up my MRI. It's really fun. You say, where's the speech center of the brain? Well, that's where that giant hole is, because I don't have that anymore. That it complete, because when my aneurysm blew, blood, when it hits your brain cells, it kills them. So that was the danger. The reason why they had to pump all that blood out of my head, and they didn't think I would survive, but they did. They did it well enough where I survived. And because of that, though, my speech center of my brain is really just not there much at all. So they remapped all of my speech through where you sing. And my speech therapist is like, it's kind of like this. When the Beatles sing, they don't sound English. Right?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's not even the same part of your brain. It's funny to think about that, because you're thinking you're just using the same part of your brain because you're talking, but in a different way. But it's a completely different part of your brain. So they had to like retrain me to talk through that part of your brain. I will tell you, I tell people, everybody, everything I had to do in my rehab, the hardest thing ever was learning how to talk again. That drained me, and I had no idea. And my doctor was like, look, it takes a lot more calories to think than people think it does. And I would come home from my day of like 7 hours of speech therapy, and I would come home and I would just be asleep until the next morning, where I'd have a little bit of breakfast and go back and do it again. I was like so beat down. It was the hardest thing ever. And when I was in speech therapy, and it's funny that my speech therapist even know this, I would go home and I put on my earphones from podcasting and listen to myself. And then I could actually hear my mistakes. I could never hear them before then. It's really weird, because the reason why most people don't like their voice when they hear it recording is because the voice in your head is not what you sound like. Because it's a mishmash of the bass through your brain and your skull, but also your brain is really good at just assuming what you're saying is what you're saying. So aphasia is when you lose the ability to know what you're actually saying. You just assume. Your brain just says, you said what you said. It doesn't matter. And you think you hear that, but you don't. And it's the funny part about science sometimes is like, look, you can be convinced that you're hearing your voice in your head, but you're not. And that's why you hate your own voice when it's recorded, because it's not what you're used to hearing.
This is quite an insight for a podcaster to have, really, because it is acutely aware, or it's acutely important to people like you and I and all our colleagues in the skeptical podcasting world that our voices, we trade off our voices to a very large extent. And you're right. I mean, quite often when I'm re-editing the Skeptic Zone and I'm listening to myself, there'll be times where I completely mispronounce a word. Yeah. It sounds completely different to the word that I should have said or I thought I said. And I have to go back and record a sentence or something like that. It's a very strange experience. Yeah.
And like I said, you could probably swear that you said that, but you didn't.
It is absolutely strange. Well, this year's something to look forward to, Derek. I can't wait to be there at DragonCon. I'm doing a Skeptic Zone live, which I'm looking forward to. I'm on a couple of panels. But what can people expect when they come along?
Oh, geez. Oh, let's see. This year, we have some really good magicians. We got Jamie Ann Swiss. We got Kurt Anderson. And then we also have Matt Dillonhoney, who also does the Atheist Experience. And he actually has a TV show in the Midwest somewhere that talks about that stuff. He's a really good mentalist as well. A lot of people don't know that. So we do a lot of magic. Obviously, the crossover between magic and skepticism is pretty obvious to your audience.
Yeah,
sure. But a lot of people don't realize it. So to me, it's one of the best ways to get people. So that's really cool. And actually this year, between Matt and Kurt, they're actually creating a show that's going to be very much aimed right at the skeptical heart of some of the stuff that James Randi likes to talk about too, like the psychic surgery and all that. how they used to fool you with actual stage magic to make people think that magic was real. For the past 8 or so years, I've always had a couple nights, 3 or 4 nights of just late night, skeptical comedy. So we have Leanne Lord again. We got Ian Harris. And then we also usually on Sunday or Saturday night, depends on when I can get all the people there. Georgia Tech, all the professors and a bunch of the students that are from the physics and astronomy department, they're comedians, stand-up comedians that are actual, scholars at the university, high-level guys, that they come and they have a comedy troupe called, Geekapalooza, and they usually do that one night, either Saturday or Sunday night. And we have our normal bevy of panels and discussions and a bunch of talks too.
Well, I'm tired. I'm too tired now. I'm worn out listening to how good this is going to be. I had every time I went there years ago, I was very busy, which made me very happy. I gave talks, and I actually did a talk on the podcasting panel one year, which I enjoyed very much.
Yeah.
So I cannot wait. I cannot wait to come back and enjoy the madness, the mayhem, the color, and the confusion that is Dragon Con.
And I'm looking now. If you think it's mad, if you think madness and confusion in the past, there's nothing. That was easy. You were talking. That was like old Hokum Local convention when you saw all before. You wait. It is now like it's the size of a city now. It's crazy. The whole thing is nuts. But I love it every year. I tell people it's mad, but I think to me it's my Christmas. It's a bunch of people I don't see, but yet once a year, maybe twice if I'm lucky. But, you all get together, you're having fun, and then, of course, you're depressed when it's over, but you have to just wait for another year. But to me, it's like all the family gets back together once a year, and you have a blast, and then, you have to wait a whole another year for open up presents again.
Well, I loved it before. I'm sure I will love it again. Derek, if people want to come along, where can they get the information?
Go to www.dragoncon.org. O-R-G. At DragonCon, we don't have tickets. We have memberships because when you come to DragonCon, you remember for life. Every time you come, the number they give you is the number you keep. But so when you buy your membership, it's always best to buy it now because the ticket prices go up by $20 every 2 to 3 months. And then soon, within the next week, the skeptics.dragoncon.org for the Skeptic track. You just skeptics.dragoncon.org or skeptrack.org goes to the same place. I will be posting the schedule and some of the information for what's going to be happening this year.
Excellent. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes this week, and very soon you will be able to see the full schedule coming up for this year. Can't wait to see you. I can't wait to see my friends from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and all the other people I've known over the years. But for now, take a breath, take a very big breath, prepare yourself for the madness that is DragonCon, and thank you very much, Derek Colanduno.
Thank you, Richard, and I will see you in about a month.
Surf Coast Spring Skepticamp 2019 in September. CSCCS is Australia's longest running Skepticamp. This year we are celebrating our 7th year. Skepticamps are designed to give many members the opportunity to briefly, 20 to 30 minutes, present on a topic of their choice. Skepticamps have been run in hundreds of locations and in many countries since the first one was held in 2007 in Denver. The event will be at Aireys Inlet, an idyllic township located on the Victorian Surf Coast. Come down for the day or make it a weekend by staying a night or two in the region. Either way, just feel free to enjoy the location and the views. At the end of the day, we adjourn to the Aireys pub for a drink, a bite to eat, and of course, skeptical discussion. It's free to register, but we will ask for about $10 to cover the cost of lunch on the day. Financial support will be provided by Dr. Mick Vagg, founder of the event, and the Victorian Skeptics and the Morty Skeptics. That's Surf Coast Spring Skeptic Camp for 2019 on the 14th of September from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Aries Inlet Community Hall. For more information, just Google Surf Coast Spring Skeptic Camp or follow the links in this week's show notes. This year, once again, the Australian Skeptics will be presenting the annual Bent Spoon Award. The Bent Spoon Award is presented annually to the perpetrator of the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle. The very first Bent Spoon Award was given out in 1982 to Tom Wards, a self-proclaimed psychic whose predictions in the popular press were renowned for their inaccuracy. Other winners over the years have included Peter Brock, who was a very famous and a very skillful racing car driver here in Australia. However, he fell into the deception of orgone energy and was trying to sell something he called the energy polarizer, which is a device once fitted to a car engine was said to make the car run better and give you better fuel economy, and so on and so forth. Anne Dankbar, an Adelaide psychic, who said she discovered the Colossus of Rhodes. In 1991, Woman's Day magazine, for its coverage and support of the paranormal, in particular astrology, and Woman's Day and New Idea to this day, still promote the paranormal. A creationist, Alan S. Roberts, for his search for Noah's Ark. A more serious winner, or a more serious subject for a winner, was 1997 Dr. Vera Schreibner for her anti-immunization advice. The late Mike Willesee won in 1999 for a documentary he sponsored called Signs from God, where he visited people displaying the stigmata. In 2005, ABC Television won with a program called Second Opinion, which was a very uncritical, more or less ad for woo and quackery of every shape and colour and description. I remember that show very well. It truly was a parade of endless quackery. Another important award was made in 2006 to the Pharmacists of Australia, and reading from the blurb, who managed to forget their scientific training long enough to sell quackery and snake oil, such as homeopathy and ear candles, in places where consumers should expect to get real medical supplies and advice. And although that was presented way back in 2006, you can today walk into many pharmacies across Australia and still find homeopathy and ear candles. Another anti-vaxxer in 2009, Meryl Dorey, whose name has come up quite frequently over the years on the Skeptic Zone, and the deceptively named Australian Vaccination Network, who spread fear and misinformation about vaccines. They are currently called the Australian Vaccination Risks Network. In a similar vein, in 2012, the winner was Fran Sheffield from Homeopathy Plus. This is an Australian outfit selling homeopathy to cure everything imaginable. The blurb says, they won for advocating the use of magical sugar and water in place of tried and true vaccination for many deadly diseases, most notably whooping cough. In 2013, it was the turn of the Chiropractors Association of Australia and the Chiropractic Board of Australia for failing to ensure their own members, including some committee members, adhere to their policy announcements. Another anti-vaxxer in 2016, Julie Wileman. And we come to 2018, the latest winner, Sarah Stevenson, Sarah's Day, for the promotion of questionable natural health remedies via her vast network of followers. Sort of an Instagram influencer, I guess you'd say. Now, all this is to encourage you, if you're in Australia, or you know of an Australian quack or purveyor of particular woo, you can nominate them for the Ben Spoon Award. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's easy to find. If you go to skeptics.com.au and follow the link to features, then the Ben Spoon Award. And it says here, nominations. For a nomination to be accepted, it should include the following details. The name and contact details of the nominator. Only the name will be listed on the website. The name of the person or organisation being nominated. The reason for the nomination, including a clear explanation of the link to the paranormal or to pseudoscience. Please do not nominate people who do their woo outside Australia, even if they appear on Australian television doing so. The bent spoon is for local heroes only. We also reserve the right to reject nominations that are deemed inappropriate. Defamatory or frivolous nominations will not be accepted. And I think almost without fail, people will write in nominating the Australian Skeptics. Now, to give you some idea, so far we've got 3 nominations for this year's Ben Spoon Award. We have SBS Television for their program Medicine or Myth, and this reminds me a little bit of the Second Opinion program all those years ago. This is nominated by Gary Barker, and it says, every episode of SBS TV's Medicine or Myth television program misinforms the public as to how products and therapies can or should be tested for safety and effectiveness. What is displayed is television, not science. In particular, the episode telecast on June 2nd included a segment on emotional freedom techniques, a process of tapping with 2 fingers. Why 2? On putative points along one's meridians to relieve stress. And there's more information about that nomination on the website. Now, the next nominee is for Dr. Terry Beths and the University of Melbourne, and this is by Hugh Ham. Dr. Terry Beths, head of the Anaesthesia and Pain Management, Assistant Professor in Veterinary Anaesthesia and Analgesia at the University of Melbourne, and the university itself for promoting animal acupuncture and traditional Chinese veterinary medicine at the University of Melbourne's U-Vet Werribee Animal Hospital. And finally, we come to a nomination by Jeff Andrews, Good Price Pharmacy. The Good Price Pharmacy gives away a magazine called Natural Health Crusader, which in reality is an advertising channel for Caruso natural health products. Although the propagation of unproven therapies alone should be enough to win them the award, they also use Pete Evans, who incidentally is a previous Bent Spoon winner, to push their products, with an interview, quote, How Pete Evans Changed Our Lives, end quote. Evans is a supporter of the anti-vaccination movement, which worships at the feet of the discredited Dr. Andrew Wakefield. Although the article does not mention vaccination, anyone reading it could come away with the conclusion that Evans is a great guy and must be right about vaccination too. Ironically, this magazine is placed on the counter of the pharmacy next to a poster hyping their vaccination service for influenza. So there you are, the 3 nominations this year so far certainly revolve around medical claims, but that doesn't stop you nominating a psychic or any other form of woo or any other form of pseudoscience or anything along those lines. So if you want to nominate, why not have a go? Your nomination will be reviewed, and if it's acceptable, will be published on the website of Australian Skeptics, and your nominee will be in the running for the Ben Spoon Award. Once again, just head for skeptics.com.au and you can read all about the Ben Spoon Award, or just follow the links in this week's show notes.
Be Reasonable is the interview show from the Merseyside Skeptic Society, where each month I speak to someone about their fringe beliefs. Over the years I've spoken to psychics, UFO believers, moon landing deniers, flat earthers, hollow earthers and all manner of unusual conspiracy theorists. But I've also talked to AIDS denialists, white supremacists, gay conversion therapists. I even interviewed Jim Humble, the inventor of Miracle Mineral Supplement, a form of industrial bleach that he and his followers use to treat cancer and HIV. This isn't a debate show, and my aim isn't to win an argument. But when we listen to how people promote and justify the ideas that we disagree with, even the dangerous ones, I think we become much more effective at countering those ideas. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, look for Be Reasonable on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else that podcasts live.
Now, over the past months, we've been bringing you reports, articles, insights, investigations and interviews from the pages of The Skeptic, the journal from Australian Skeptics, and I thought this week I would read you the very first article ever to appear, way back in the Skeptic number 1 from 1981. Skeptics Test Psychic Surgeon by Mark Plummer. When a small paragraph advertised in The Age on January the 3rd stated that an English medium psychic surgeon would be commencing practice in Melbourne, the Australian Skeptics swung into action. The advertised numbers were rung, and we were told that Mr. Roman Diakov acted as a medium for deceased surgeons to conduct psychic operations. An appointment was arranged for an elderly patient and her son to attend for surgery. The patient was actually 73-year-old medical practitioner Dr. Miffy Beadnell, and her son was magician Mike Wilton, a committee member of the Australian Skeptics. Our team of Dr. Beadnell and Mike Wilton found Mr. Diakov's clinic located in a new villa unit at 22 Aiken Street, Kew. The family room of the villa was the reception area, and the receptionist/nurse went to great lengths to assure the seemingly fragile elderly lady that there would be no pain. We were informed there would be no blood either, as Mr. Diakov worked only on the psychic body. The nurse assured our team that operations done to date had been very successful. Diakov left to prepare himself and donned a white coat. Wilton was assured that he would be able to observe the treatment in the bedroom, which became the operating theatre for the night. With dim blue lighting and the strains of "Michael, row your boat ashore," Dr. Beadnell was laid on the bed/operating table. After a suitable brief prayer, Diakov slowly stood, then walked with a limp. He had adopted the plummy accent of a Pommy Dr. Roberts. Dr. Roberts then examined Dr. Beadnell's cranium with a special invisible psychic microscope. Dr. Roberts amazed our team with the revelation that the brain was divided into two halves, the left and the right, and was composed of millions of cells. Dr. Roberts stated that several of these naughty cells were misbehaving themselves. This was explained in layman's terms as being akin to a car motor with loose spark plugs. The problem explained, the treatment began. Several special invisible psychic tubes were inserted through Dr. Beadnell's head, threaded through the body, and came out through the soles of her feet. Then all the bad fluids were psychically drained from her body. This was followed by the passing of hands down the length of the body and the amazing discovery that one half of the patient's brain was hot. More passings of hands followed, but clearly a second opinion was needed. Dr. Roberts left Mr. Diakov's body, and Dr. Maris, supposedly a deceased French gynecologist, took over. Dr. Maris' French accent had clearly deteriorated since his death, to say nothing of his diagnostic talents, for the diagnosis was that the patient's stomach pains were caused by displaced pelvic bones after the birth of her last child. Lying on the bed, our Dr. Bignell couldn't remember having any children, not even a miscarriage. Dr. Maurice also diagnosed deafness in her left ear. Our patient couldn't remember deafness having been a problem, but clearly this, like the birth of her various children, must have slipped her memory. Dr. Roberts returned to wrap up the post-operative treatment. The good lady would have to come back for further treatment. She would feel quite tired over the next few days and must drink plenty of water. She would also pass more fluid than normal. One would hope that anyone drinking more water than normal would also pass more water than normal. Our team posed a few more questions for Dr. Roberts to find out he was a practicing brain surgeon at St. Bartholomew's before dying in 1948. Before more questions could be put, Dr. Roberts had to depart, leaving us with Dr. Dyakov to show our team out the door. The opinion of the Australian Skeptics testing team, in case you haven't guessed, is that the utterances of the doctors who operated revealed a complete lack of any medical knowledge. Their diagnosis was wrong, and the hopeless French accent merely added to the conclusion that Mr. Dyakov was false. Our findings confirmed that of an American Federal Court Trade Commission judgment in 1975 that psychic surgery and psychic healing is pure fakery and fraud accomplished by the deception and trickery of the psychic surgeons to deceive trusting persons into the false and mistaken belief that human bodies have been opened with the bare hands, diseased material or disease-causing material removed, and the incision closed, all without pain or suffering. And Mr. Dyakov, if you can reach him on the advertised phone numbers, please tell him the Australian Skeptics are wondering how to explain the item in their books, Psychic Surgery Fee $20, to their auditors. And that comes to us once again from the Skeptic magazine, number 1. On the very front page, the very first story. Also on the front page, which is a broadsheet size, quite big, Doris Stokes wrong, police, with a big photograph of James Randi. Other stories include Perth still here. Extensive research by the Australian Skeptics has shown that the city of Perth is still there, because apparently it was predicted that the city would be wiped out by a giant wall of water. Elsewhere in the very first issue we have a story called Alien Honeycomb Tested. News of the very first Bent Spoon Award, which was called the Golden Bent Spoon Award in those days. A story about biorhythms, mass hysteria, also skeptics to test levitation claims. And one of the last stories simply says Australian Skeptics. Last year, Sydney's electronics entrepreneur Dick Smith sponsored a visit to Australia by James Randi, magician and principal investigator for the American-based Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. James Randi, Dick Smith, Philip Adams, Richard Carlton, and a businessman put up $50,000 as a prize for anyone who could prove psychic phenomena in front of Randi. Over 100 people came forward to be tested for water divining, spoon bending, extrasensory perception, psychic photography, and psychic metal detection. All failed to prove their claims in front of independent observers. That is not to say psychic phenomena does not exist, and a group of Australians decided to set up an Australian section of the now International Committee to continue the search and testing of the claims of the paranormal. It was decided to call the group the Australian Skeptics, as a short and catchy title. There you are, a little bit of history. And that complete issue is yours, free to download by visiting www.skeptics.com.au.
The Earth is only 6,000 years old. That's what Answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum say, and how can a museum be wrong?
Isn't Dr. Oz just wonderful? I loved today's episode. It didn't talk down to his adoring audience of women at all.
Science has proved that the subatomic quantum realm is as real as it is counterintuitive and bizarre. Therefore, I can use it to support quantum healing and quantum consciousness. After all, how can journals like Aquarius Metaphysics be wrong?
Evolution is just a theory. After all, if we came from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys?
We all have friends and family who believe these things and much more. Well, if you're a rational thinker who is tired of arguing on social media and never getting anywhere, we have a solution for you.
Join the Guerrilla Skepticism and Wikipedia team, and we will teach you how to add reliable scientific and skeptical information to the world's #1 source of information, Wikipedia.
We write new articles and improve existing ones. We remove pseudoscience, paranormal, and alt-met claims, substituting the actual facts. And we operate in many languages.
We've already reached tens of millions of people searching for information, but as you can imagine, we can never do enough.
So please, join us. All you need is a PC and the desire to help educate the planet. In fact, you'll be educating the world while you sleep.
Contact us at gsowteam@gmail.com. Guerrilla Skepticism. The time is now.
Music by purpleplanet.com.
Join us now for Drinking Skeptically in the Think Tank.
A hush has fallen over the audience now as the hundreds of thousands of people at the Penny Black next door just go nuts during the meet-up that we've been having. A hush falls over and a microphone is passed to the man of the moment, Richard Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this special Melbourne think tank. It's not the first Melbourne think tank we've had, but it's the first one this year, I might say, Maynard. This is a wonderful evening that our friend Lindley has really put together, and yourself.
Hello.
Hello. And we've snuck away from the main bar where there are lots of people, with a select group of people here to have a little think tank chatting session. And let me introduce our special guest for the think tank, James Randi.
Hello there. I'm very happy to be here in such an august company. To say the least, I'm exaggerating now, of course, but we'll see how august you can be in the next 10, 15 minutes.
We'll see how we can do. We've got a lovely group of people. They're all taking photographs for some reason. Maynard, let's go around the room and let people introduce themselves.
Yes, and now we have a neutral here.
Yes, hi. My name is Roland. I'm from Switzerland, and I'm here in Melbourne for 1 year for study reasons. And I knew a lot about the Skeptic Zone and the Australian Skeptics, and that's why I'm here.
And you told me that there's no skeptical movement in Switzerland officially.
That's not true, not anymore. We have now one.
Not till now, yeah.
Yeah, till now. We have founded a new one. You'd find it under the website www.skeptica.ch. Skeptica written with a K.
Hey. And of course we have Posty Lindley.
Hello, how are you, Maynard?
Fine. Now, how are you finding it so far?
Very good. Very hot, and I need another drink.
And we have Sir Gavin.
Hello, Maynard. Hello, listeners.
Like myself, a No Agenda listener and a Skeptic Zone listener.
I am also a producer of No Agenda and long-time skeptic.
Yes.
And private investigator.
Oh.
Yeah. So now you know why he's here.
I don't believe anything that I can't see, hear, feel, smell, touch, or photograph.
Who we got here?
John Carney. I'm not entirely sure why I'm here.
I think you were here for the free drinks, John, wasn't it?
Oh, that's it, of course.
Just so I know what page you're on, what's your woo that really annoys you?
The woo that really annoys me is bad reporting, bad journalism, bad science journalism in particular.
Amen.
I'm Skeptical Steve Roberts from Australian Skeptics. I live around here, so...
You were just walking past and saw a crowd?
Well, indeed, yeah. There's quite a crowd here, in fact, yeah. I'm a bit zonked out because I've just ridden the motorbike from London to Vladivostok, but I got the bike back this morning, so I'm kind of...
You know you can fly now.
Oh, can you? Oh, I wish they'd told me that, yeah. No, I can tell you, or sometime I'll do a show about all the superstitious beliefs of Outer Mongolia and so on, but it's good to be hearing all you guys here in Melbourne, my hometown, and You're very welcome.
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, you should mention that part of the world. You were in Russia recently, right?
Yep.
And one of the very first times I remember seeing much about the amazing James Randi was a documentary that he took part in called Secrets of the Psychics, where he went to Russia not long after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what a fascinating documentary that was. Do you have vivid memories of that time, Randy?
Yes. Well, there was Curlian photography and everything in that, wasn't there?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, it was an interesting period in history in general, of course, to everyone all around the world. But to me, particularly for one aspect, they had been freed up all of a sudden. And they didn't know what the hell to do with it, The churches were suddenly filling up when they had been pretty well discouraged from gathering crowds and such, but the churches were chock full right to the doors and to the windows, as a matter of fact. And everybody who had any kind of crazy idea, like Curlian photography or any of these things that are so popular among the woo-woo crowd, as I refer to them, that suddenly took off. And it got away from the authorities, and I don't know what happened to it eventually, but it did sort of level out at a high level of acceptance and belief in all kinds of strange things. It was rather disturbing.
Of all the places and all the countries you've travelled to, is there one nation you find more suggestible than another one?
No, not really. I get asked this question constantly, as you might imagine, but it's just of a different degree or a different flavor. In some places they'll all be for psychic surgery, for example, and they accept it. And oh yes, it's the way of medicine. That's the future of medicine, right? And right next door, in another country, just 2 miles over the border, they say, "Oh, psychic surgery, that's total nonsense." No, but Curlian photography is the thing. There's no question of that.
You were just telling me that Switzerland has done the opposite to most other governments, and they've actually enshrined complementary medicine into their system officially.
Yes, unfortunately, that's one of the side effects of direct democracy. We had a couple of years ago a People's Initiative where they introduced complementary medicine into the constitution, and that has, as a result, that the government healthcare system has now to pay complementary and alternative medicine.
Wow. Now, that's the opposite to the Australian and English government.
Yes, and that's probably one of the reasons why we started to come together and organize ourselves.
Now, Switzerland is known for this sort of thing, particularly in the complementary medicine angle. Hahnemann, after all, he grew up there pretty well, and he founded homeopathy. That's a strange expression, founded homeopathy. The words don't come easily.
Now here's an amazing coincidence you get from time to time. When you flew to Russia, and this is trivial knowledge, you flew with Swiss Air.
Yes, but I didn't blame them. No. They were my hosts after all, so I had to be polite. But I did have I must tell you, I'm compelled. There's no question of it. I was in Copenhagen. I guess it was about 2 years ago, and I was taking a friend to lunch, and right across a massive traffic, a real traffic jam in the middle of Copenhagen, I heard, "Mr. Randi, Mr. Randi." And I looked around, and there's a fellow waving his hand in the air at me, and I figured, well, nobody knows I'm in town, really, but he rushed through the crowd, almost got run over several times, and he rushed up to me, all breathless. He said, "Mr. Randi." He extended his hand. I shook his hand. He said, I want you to know, I'm a skeptic too. And I pulled a line on him, which, he bought us lunch as a result of it, so I'll give you the line just in case you want to get a free lunch. I just looked him up and down very quietly after he said, "I'm a skeptic too," and I looked at him, I said, "I doubt that." Just to keep in character, you see. I had to be in character. And he was so thrilled with that expression, he bought us lunch. So I got his address, as a matter of fact. So if you go to Copenhagen, I'm sure that you'll...
he's good for it.
Oh, he's good for it, I'm sure, yes.
Now, I was just going to ask the crowd here in general, We're all here, of course, for the Australian Skeptics National Convention. How important do you think, and I know TAM in the United States has been going for, it'll be 11 years next year, I think.
Yes, I believe so.
And in Australia, we've been having conventions now for 28 years, I think it is, man. How important do you think, just around the room, it is to have these gatherings? Is it preaching to the converted, or do you think it's more important than that? Lindley?
Lindley.
I find it more fun to get out and meet people. It's important, obviously, to get the word out. There are people who are young or who have just come into the scene, young or old, and it's good to sort of pass on the message that skepticism and science is the way to view the world. You can't sort of rely on psychic bullcrap or whatever sort of rubbish that's out there. And also a fun way of just meeting people, all that sort of stuff.
Well, Gavin, you've been to a couple of these things. What do you make of them?
I love going to Skeptic camps whenever I can. My schedule's fairly busy being a private investigator, but I love meeting like-minded people, like Lindy said, enjoying their company and finding a new woo to hate. And I'm looking over there at Lucky 88 is out of order. Irony, love it.
Yeah, we're in a pokies joint.
The pokey venues, yeah. And I do. I just love meeting the like-minded people and just using the scientific method in my daily life. I have to.
Well, actually, as a private investigator, you have to be sceptical about stuff, but also the law isn't always logical. So you've got that dichotomy going on.
The law is an ass, but if you treat it as an ass and you treat it like a child, so that whatever you have to prove, you prove it from the ground floor right up to the penthouse. I've been quizzed in court back in the day when I was in the Federal Police. I took photographs, old chemical film photographs of a man carrying a package contained about 20 kilos of methamphetamine. And 2 years later, when I had to prove those photographs in court, we had to take the negatives and the prints, and the man in the suit was not the man in the death metal T-shirt with long hair, but it was still the same man. And it's that scientific proof that, yes, I put my hand on the Bible. Don't tell anyone. I put my hand on the Bible. I swore the oath that I took that photograph, and these are my photographs that I produced to the court. And I found, unfortunately, that if you took the affirmation, juries would not give as much weight to your evidence as it. So I would pick up the Bible and I would swear by Almighty God that the evidence I should give to the court in this case should be the truth, the whole truth, and anything but the truth.
And you would have found that too, Randy, that there is a bit of a bias against that in American courtrooms as well. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, see, my ambition, I'm a rascal. There's no question about it. I was born a rascal. It's in the DNA, and I'm not responsible for it. It's my parents. You have to go after them. But see, what I would do is I would get a copy of a pornographic novel, and I would put a cover of a Bible on it, and I would use that for the oath. But that's my nature. But to get serious now.
You're a troublemaker. It starts with the beard and it goes from there.
But to get serious, folks, this I think is important. When we do the amazing meeting in Las Vegas every year, I spot people who I figure have something to say to me, and I let them have the opportunity of sort of getting me aside. And in many cases, this is more often than you might imagine, I will get people bursting into tears and telling me I had to come to this meeting because, it made a great deal of difference to me. I didn't realize before there were other people who believe the way I do, that this is so much bullcrap or whatever. They break down. They break down and they look around them. It's like they've just gotten into paradise somehow. But it's very serious to a lot of these people, and those people always show up in the subsequent years. Every year they go out of their way to make sure they're going to be there. And I've developed a little coterie of these folks who we rescued. We really did rescue them from some sort of insanity They didn't realize that there were people like the fellow who says, I'm a skeptic too, you know. I doubt that. But there are people like this who really need this kind of support. It's extremely important to them. And sometimes I get very heartfelt letters, too, that run on for several pages from people I've never heard of before, never heard their names, and they just find an address for me. This is very, very important, and that's why a meeting such as we're at right at this very moment can be very important to a lot of folks. It really supports them.
And have you noticed this, John and Stephen, for meetings like this in Victoria?
I think so. I think another important thing about skeptics groups and meetings in particular, well, not in particular, but is this is the source of activism against things like anti-vaccine groups. I mean, you know, it's so important, and I don't think, you know, the media or even the scientific establishment is really geared to act against groups like that. I think, you know, interest groups like skeptics groups are very well placed to kind of run grassroots campaigns against, you know, people who are pitching harmful, dangerous woo.
Yeah, and Steve, you've been around for a few years now.
Yeah. Although James is somewhat older, a couple of years older.
I'm older than everybody in the world, you know.
Methuselah, yeah. Look, I've been to many conferences since 1987, and it's important to meet up. It's not very important to have the conference and hear the speakers, because we know each other. We know what they're going to say. We know, and even if it's new to us, we'll know the attitude already. It's very, very important to meet up and actually to further this on the web with, you know, email and Facebook pages and so on, to actually get to know the other skeptics and form a sort of web of camaraderie. That's really important to have in place, because, as John said, the opposition groups we have are organised. And we're not organised. We're all just like herding cats, really. But you know, we're up against, you know, the anti-vaccination mob, the biblical fundamentalist mobs. They're thoroughly organised societies with a priest and dogma and no dissent internally, and they're quite hard to oppose on some things. So we need all the strength we can find while retaining our individual thoughts and attitudes, you know, and personalities. And this is a very important way of doing it, to actually meet people in the flesh that you've only seen on Facebook.
I'm holding up a photo of Brian Dunning of Skeptoid on a stick now. That's intimidating.
Yeah. That's intimidating.
Hello, I'm Brian Dunning. I've got a deep voice.
But then there's one of Maynard next to it, and that's
takes
quite
the sting
funny.
off it.
Oh, we've got to hold him up.
Oh, we've got to hold just a quick photo, and then it'll be back to Richard. Now, Richard, what are you hoping for? I'll give you our next point.
Well, I'm hoping for world peace and the adoption of the scientific method. No, I know
one will follow from the other.
One might follow from the other.
World peace will be easier.
I'm sure. I'm really looking forward to this weekend and all the sessions that are coming up. I know that James Randi is visiting a school tomorrow. A really important thing to
That's because they've got spaghetti bolognese at the tuck shop. That's why he's going out there. Yeah.
Apart from that,
nice meal.
I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I think we've all learned something this afternoon. Most other people more than me, because I'm not particularly bright. But what do you think? What are you looking forward to finish off?
Well, I must tell you about an Alice who I know. Now, we were talking about the feminine angle on this sort of thing. This Alice is a person a very, very good friend of mine. I worked with Alice for a long time on a special tour, and I must say that Alice has turned into a fundamentalist freak. But Alice's father was a Mormon minister, after all. I'm speaking, unfortunately, of Alice Cooper. And I worked with Alice. I did a whole tour with Alice. We got along very well. We still get along very, very well. But we don't argue about religion. He knows better than that.
Do you think it's because of his wild, crazy days, it's almost like an antidote, or some way that the pendulum had to swing back that way again?
It might very well be. I've always thought of that. But I don't want to get into an argument with him. He's still a good friend of mine. I want to keep him that way.
I think he's a beautiful man. I think he's still such a wonderful man. If I see him now, I just don't believe he's that Alice Cooper.
That's him. Yeah, that's him. Oh, yes.
Wonderful. I love him.
I'm a big Alice Cooper fan, but I'm more of a fan of the man who discovered Alice Cooper, Frank Zappa.
That was my brother and my two nephews who are both under 5 wishing me happy birthday.
Oh, very good. You can't pass that up.
So, tore me away from the bar, basically.
Let's wrap it up, Maynard. Can you just wrap it up?
Okay, that's fine.
Well, we've certainly been having a bit of fun here in this very small room off a side lane in Brunswick Street with Randy and Richard and Stephen and John and Gavin, and I can see Lindley, and I can see Roland as well. And thank you for joining us here on this very special episode of the Drunk Tank.
Yay! Amen to that.
Amen to that?
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, if you go to skepticzone.tv, under the YouTube icon on every episode, you'll see a download for a new promotion for the Skeptic Zone. If you care to use it, if you have a podcast of your own or you want to add this file to your page, it's only 30 seconds, and it's a promotion for the Skeptic Zone. Help pass the word around. Also on that page, if you scroll right to the bottom, I've added some more origami posters, some of my origami foldings and photography, and I've placed those up on Wikimedia, so they are free to download in high resolution. And I always think that they would make a nice addition to a children's room, or maybe the children's ward in a hospital, or anywhere really. I think they're quite fun pictures. Have a look at skepticzone.tv right at the bottom of the page. On Tuesday, the 6th of August, just coming up, at the Maudie Skeptics in the Pub in Victoria, just south of Melbourne, Climate Change, Latest Research, Findings, Dr. Scott Power. Using 22 climate models, Scott Power and Francois Delage at the Australian Bureau of Meteorology in Melbourne analysed the rate at which monthly temperatures are likely to reach unprecedented levels over the course of the 21st century. The results are disturbing. Scott will outline his findings and the predictions of the modelling. For more information about that particular meetup, you can go to meetup.com and just look for Maudie, M-O-R-D-I, Skeptics in the Pub. Again, links in this week's show notes. And, of course, on Tuesday, the 13th of August, in Canberra, Social Skeptics in Canberra, we have our very own Trish Han, who is a reporter on the Skeptic Zone with her segment Trish and Chips. She's also a vice president of the Australian Skeptics here in New South Wales, and she will be giving a talk, Women's Woo, Pseudoscience and Women's Health. This is from 6 p.m. at the Law Lecture Theatre, Law School Building number 5, at the Australian National University. And this talk is a tour through the world of women's woo. There's probably more of it than you realise, and it's often weirder than you expect. And dinner will follow that talk. Again, links in this week's show notes for Social Skeptics Canberra. And I saw Trish Han on the TV news just a couple of days ago, because Trish also works at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital here in Sydney, a very famous hospital, and she was taking part in action to highlight the very real dangers a lot of hospital staff face in this country from violent and unruly people who come into the hospital for various reasons. Agitated people, people angry at something, people affected by certain substances, I guess. Whatever the case. And Trish and her colleagues were highlighting the fact that they should be able to work in a safe environment. And as somebody promoting science and reason, as hospital people do, of course, I think it's acutely important that they work in a safe environment. Like everybody, no matter what their workplace, should be able to work in a safe environment. So well done, Trish, and your colleagues for standing up to highlight and support that very important issue. And finally, if you visit the Skeptic Zone Facebook page, one of the recent postings is a fun poster or a fun picture of the Skeptic Zone cats, Henrietta and Maud. If you go there, you can see what they really do behind the scenes here at the Skeptic Zone. Mostly sleep, I think. Yeah. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
What you're saying is what you're saying. So when you have aphasia like I do, my brain just assumes when I say a word and that it's the word I want to say.
I better let you get that alarm. Oh, stop.
That's actually my ringer on my phone, because I have an iPhone and everybody has like all the different rings, so I just use that.
Oh, right.
I know that is my ring because nobody uses the red alert for their ringtone. So that's the funny thing is, like, so one of the reasons why you don't like your voice when you hear it recorded is because it's not the voice you're used to hearing.